I think we can start. Our guest today is Amanda, who's going to join us during the summer or the fall. So you have about 60 minutes, and the floor is yours. So,
okay, thank you very much for the invitation once again. So the paper I will present today is a joint work with Renaud Foucart, who is one of my supervisors at Lancaster University. And you may have noticed that the title is slightly different. So we used in the previous version of shrimp, and then now it's shrimps. Actually, shrimp is an uncountable name in English. However, we just found out that when the shrimps are of different varieties, then it becomes countable. And this paper is, of course, about product diversity. So definitely our shrimps are not all the same. You will see why. So I would start with a very broad, perhaps trivial question, which is why do firms innovate? So the most accredited explanation is that firms deliver innovations in order to temporarily at least escape competition. So in our perspective, which is the same as Jon, innovation essentially gives a temporary advantage to the innovator, meaning that innovation happens in a step-by-step process where the innovator or the leader cannot move too far ahead of the laggards. Because of this technology spillover, that means that at some point, the followers will catch up. And according to the prediction of these models, essentially the competition is restored in the market as it was in the previous period, so before the innovation happened. The question that we ask in this paper, however, is slightly different. So we want to investigate whether the catch-up phase, if it is possible, that the catch-up phase, rather than restoring exactly the same level of competition as it was in the period before the innovation, ended up in a higher competition level. And the channel that we investigate is essentially the channel of product differentiation. So what we assume is that delivering an innovation in a variety of a product actually may change the incentives for firms to offer differentiated products. And so, if this is true, then if the incentives decrease, differentiation in the market will decrease. And we know that when differentiation is lower, then we will have a greater competition in the catch-up phase and potentially lower profits than there were in the pre-innovation period. Okay, so this is more or less the theoretical framework that we try to set up. We complement the study by looking at specific real case scenario that somehow is meant to illustrate the predictions of our model. And it is the case of the US shrimp industry competition with the Asian countries. And as far as I know, this is the very first paper to show that an innovation actually can be detrimental to the innovator's profit due to this channel of the product variety and product differentiation.
Can I ask about that? So if this is so, then why do we innovate? You don't foresee this, or there's another mechanism that, like a scale effect. So if my product is going to go down because of extra competition, why do I innovate in the first place?
So you innovate in the variety that is essentially the variety that you're producing, the product differentiated variety that you have on your own. So you innovate. Usually, innovation is meant like a cost reduction. Okay, so we want to essentially reduce the cost of producing your own variety. But because the innovation may become very attractive to the others, that would create like a sort of convergence channel where the other competitors in the market will get incentives to produce that exactly same variety, because that variety is now very much attractive in terms of lower cost to produce. But that would, of course, decrease the differentiation in the sense that their own variety will disappear from the market. Yeah.
I wouldn't innovate. I didn't innovate that.
Exactly. So yes, this is exactly what is the end of the story. Actually, we will see. So essentially, yeah.
If you think in a anime context, then what I gathered as excess profit is enough for the next stage to innovate again.
Yes, so this is one of the, so this is exactly what we will discuss in the last part of the paper. So why do firms then innovate? That's exactly big question. If it's not convenient in reality in the long term, then why do they do it? And one possible explanation is exactly the one that you said, if they don't place enough weight, let's say, on future profits. So if they discount sufficiently the future, then it is possible that they will innovate, even though the outcome is essentially negative in the long run. Yeah, if I understood correctly. Yeah. So, so the shrimp industry, I won't spend too much time on this because we will look at the case study later on, but just to have a little bit of understanding of what happened, because I think it also helps to understand the theoretical framework. So the shrimp industry essentially developed around the 70s in several countries. Each of the countries, and the two biggest producers were the US and the Asian countries on the other side, decided to specialize in the shrimp types which were local and native to their own territory. So that means that in the US, they were producing a certain variety of shrimp, which was the Vietnamese one, whereas the Asian country were producing another variety of shrimp, and they were both competing in the market. Until 90s, this business was a very risky and low profitable business due to the fact that this shrimp cultivation was very volatile due to the fact that these shrimps in general are very sensitive to viruses and pathogens. So very frequently there were these big outbreaks which were destroying the cultivation of shrimps, and so this business was very much underdeveloped in every country. So the US, in order to somehow protect the industry, the domestic industry, and boost the local producers, decided to sponsor a big research program which was aimed at somehow find a biotechnology which could prevent this US shrimp from developing diseases. Okay, so to immunize the US shrimp. And of course, that technology was highly successful. The US production increased a lot, and the profits also boomed in the US. But now the sad part of the story was that within a few years, this technology also became available to the Asian countries. That means that in a short time period, actually, the Asian country, once they became aware of this technology from the US, decided to adopt that technology. And because that technology was developed for the variety from the US, they essentially switched their production. So everybody virtually now is producing the same US shrimp, and the differentiation, the diversity in the market is basically lower to zero. It means that in this rate, the US producers essentially lost their market share almost entirely. They went from a market share of around 43% to less than 10% nowadays. Yes.
Were there any scale effects?
Not really, apparently not.
So people didn't start to eat more shrimps because it became more cheap.
No, this is so they've begun. I don't think the consumption of shrimp really increased, because even before. So let me think. So in the US, probably yes. In the Asian country, I would say probably instead no. So the US started importing, yes, most of the shrimp from Asia. That's I'm not sure whether the consumption actually increased or there was just a substitution effect. But that's yeah, that's something that I should perhaps verify in terms of consumer. Okay. Yeah. So what happened? So essentially, this is the situation before. So there were two differentiated products, okay, each of them produced by different competitors, and after the innovation, everybody was producing exactly the same thing at a cheaper cost. And the US were kicked out of the market due to the competition with Asia. So there are some related results in the literature that are reminiscent of these mechanisms that we set up. The theoretical results that is the closest to ours is probably the Renaud Foucart paradox. So in the Renaud Foucart paradox, they essentially show that a common decrease in unit cost decreases the profits for firms. That relies on some assumption on the convexity of the inverse demand function. And it's being used by Amir, for instance, in order to show that very often R&D races end up in a sort of prisoner dilemma, where indeed would be innovation, but because of this lack of coordination, they essentially end up innovating both and getting lower profits. For us, actually, we showed that a similar paradox also arises from another channel, which is the product differentiation one. And this is also connected to the whole literature about the relationship between innovation and product differentiation. They pointed out that indeed, more substitutability leads firms to greater efforts to innovate. In these frameworks, however, substitutability, the changes in the substitutability of products counts exogenously. Whereas instead, in our model, it's something that is a direct consequence of the innovation implemented. Last, the result in the literature, which is conceptually and even mathematically the closest to ours, is the result which doesn't come from economics, and is the so-called Bryce paradox. I don't know if you heard about it, but essentially this is a paper about infrastructure engineering. So they wanted to solve the problem of a very congested network because of traffic, and they prove essentially that by adding an express route, let's say, to this network, rather than decreasing the level of the traffic, will increase it, actually, because everybody would take that express route, meaning that that route would be very, very high traffic, and the time employed to go, for instance, from point A to point B would increase. And this is exactly what we kind of theorized, but in economical terms. So our differentiation is the network before, the innovation is the express route, and the higher traffic is the higher competition in the catch-up race. And then, of course, there is I mean, I cannot not mention the big literature, the large literature about innovation and competition. There is very mixed evidence, at least until the work of Aguillon, which investigated this relationship and whether competition fosters or not innovation development. So the presentation will follow like this. So I will first introduce the theoretical framework, and then we will look at the discussing some of the assumptions and the extension of our model and the implication. And then we will finally go to look a little bit better on the case study by providing some mostly the statistics about this industry. Yes.
Are you computing anything on consumer welfare?
I do. So yes.
Related to this, I could not differentiate the black and the yellow string when it's blue. I guess it's a pink anyway. So I'm not sure whether these effects are indeed through the decrease of variety instead of just a decrease of the production cost, like you mentioned in the food. So how you can differentiate these two things? If consumers cannot distinguish the two white and black shrimps, then
But
just
that's
care about them.
assume that the substitution is pretty high. Right? So
Yes.
effect on consumers will be. So if you have so a certain high degree of substitutability, then consumer wouldn't be affected by the fact that there will be lower diversity in the market. Actually, they would be better off because for them it's cheaper price. So it means that the consumer suffrage would increase in case of an innovation decreasing the diversity. But if they had instead had strong preference for diversified products, then from a consumer point of view, the effect might be actually negative. Yeah. So we theorize, we show that instead is positive because yes, indeed, as you said, really, this is a market that is differentiated, but from the point of view of consumers, there is not so much preference. At least we don't know in reality if there is preference or not, because we are used to eat actually all the same thing. We don't know. Yeah. Any other question? Okay, so the model. So essentially, the goal of our model, okay, is to show that this is a static comparing static outcomes essentially. Okay, So what we want to do is to show that in a market where producers compete in quantity, so I like to know, which is a reasonable assumption for this market, which is a commodity market, and can choose a given variety, then an innovation meant as a cost reduction can lead to lower product diversity and lower profits potentially in the catch-up phase. So we started out by saying that there are two representative firms for simplicity, a known firm and a foreign firm. And there are two varieties available of a product, B and M, and each of the firms can produce only one variety. So chooses the quantity. And if they choose to produce the same variety, of course, we would be in the very standard for no competition, which is super easy. And if they choose instead different varieties, then we will have a slightly different, it's the differentiated for no competition, a la single dealers.
I'm still stuck at this point that why don't we take into account that there is something which matters, namely substitution between the varieties. What is the elasticity of substitution between varieties?
What is the left? Sorry.
What is the elasticity of substitution between varieties?
Yeah, we assume that there is some substitution. So essentially, this gamma parameter here measures, it's in between 0 and 1, and it measures essentially the degree of substitutability between the two varieties. We don't take into consideration, of course, the carbon solution like either 0 or 1, so they cannot be perfectly substituted, perfectly independent demand, let's say. So there is.
You said that they are almost perfectly substituted.
Well, we would say in the answer. No, what I meant, that was mostly for the consumer. So why is it convenient? Well, because if we assume that there was a certain high degree of substitution, that's why then the consumer surplus is going to be greater after the innovation rather than in the period before. But if they had instead a strong taste for diversity, then it wouldn't apply as an example. So, okay, so we have the inverse demand function, very simple. And as I said, there is this gamma parameter that characterizes the level of substitution between the two types of products. And if it is equal to 1, then we have a standard Cournot with perfectly homogeneous product, which is not what we assume. Okay. So we assume, following Avion, that we have 3 innovation stages. So we have a pre-innovation stage where both firms produces essentially can produce either the same or different varieties at a cost of marginal positive cost. Okay. Then the innovation stage, essentially the innovator, that for simplicity in our case is the firm home. Okay, actually develops a technology that makes it able to produce a variety D, in this case, at a marginal cost lower to 0. Okay, the other costs remain C. And then there is the catch-up phase where the technology is now available also to the follower. And so they both can produce the variety B at a marginal cost equal to 0. Now, in order to interpret this C essentially is a measure of how important the innovation is, in the sense that we measure in innovation by the relevance, let's say, of innovation by the gain that he allows to get in terms of profit by lowering to 0 the marginal cost. So what is the main thing? If the costs were already very low, then lowering it to 0 means that the gain from the innovation would be small. Okay, so the innovation is actually small or non-relevant. Okay, yeah.
We will play around with the timing of the innovation and catch-up phase. So it also relates to the question of Laszlo, to what extent the innovators can earn huge enough profit.
Yes.
So that it
Yes.
it is
Yes, exactly. So this is exactly the point. So everything, we will show that everything in terms of gains from innovation depends on how much the innovation allows for a cost reduction. So how big is the innovation? Because depending on how big the innovation is, there can be different outcomes in terms of profit and different equilibrium.
You can also translate this not only in terms of the amount of the cost, but also incorporate the time for which you are the market leader, you are the innovator, who can only accept the technology, but not the others. So if the cost is smaller, but the period is still longer, then
yes,
so
exactly. Yes, true. Yes.
It's related to that. Suppose there's some intellectual property right protection that you can sustain for some period of time. I don't know if you can, for shrimp, you can have a patent.
No, you can have patent with a, yeah, no, it's actually,
10 years or whatever. Years.
yes, of course, the longer is the innovation phase, which is where they again are ripped off by the innovator only. The more convenient is to implement an innovation. That depends also, yes, on the time span. How long does it last? Yes. But we don't, yes, we don't play around with the time. It's how long can be the time span. It's just the right. We assume that at some point the catch-up will always happen. So in the pre-innovation phase, okay, so we computed essentially the expected profit from the Renaud model. And so this is the table of the potential expected payoffs. So in the pre-innovation phase, there are two possible equilibrium, okay? In each of them, both firms choose different varieties, okay? So it's convenient. So essentially, the own firm produces B, then the best response for the other firm is to produce the variety, okay, and exploit this diversity in the market. And same if the own decides to produce instead M, then the other one will adopt the variety B, which is very simple, okay. Then in the innovation,
You need some conditions on gamma for this, right? Degree of.
yes, for gamma between 0 and yes, do you think it's enough? Yeah. No, sorry, I did something.
Oh, because if gamma is less than 1, then 2 plus gamma 2.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, so it's high, yeah. Okay. So in the innovation phase, okay, then OM has a disadvantage on B because it can produce B at a lower cost, lower cost. And then we have actually 2 or 1 unique equilibrium in this phase. So the 2 equilibrium comes from the fact that if the innovation, let's say, is not relevant enough, so actually is lower than this threshold, there might be still the possibility that the innovator wouldn't use essentially the innovation he developed, so it will still offer M rather than B, okay? There is still this possibility. It depends on this cost reduction. But if the cost reduction is higher than CP, then there is a unique equilibrium where the innovator essentially produces the low cost, let's call it low cost in the sense not lower quality, but simple because it's low cost to produce. The variety B, and the best response for the other is to keep the diversity in the market and produce M, okay? Now, finally, and this is the key result, essentially, okay? In the catch-up phase, we said both of them have access to the innovation, so they can produce B at a lower cost. However, okay, it is not said that they will end up producing both B. Okay, for C lower than a certain threshold, it might be still convenient to maintain diversity in the market, meaning that there is still the possibility that one of the two wouldn't adopt essentially the innovation. So we are in a setting which is close to similar to the pre-innovation periods. They can be either here or here. Of course, the game is symmetric, but the payoff are not symmetric. So the one that is actually producing B gets higher profits than the other one. But for the other one, it's still better off by producing the other varieties. However, and this is the key, if C is actually higher than this C bar, okay, then there is a unique equilibrium. And it is this one here, where they both produce the variety B and they make this profit A squared over 9. Now, what is the point? Well, in that case, they have both a dominant strategy to produce the variety B. However, now we have a trade-off in between the gains from innovation, which is the lower cost, and the loss from the competition, because we don't have any more diversity in the market, so the competition is increased. Now, in order to to be better off in terms of profit, let's say with respect to the pre-innovation period, we have to have that this profit here should be larger than the profit they made in the pre-existing period before the innovation. And this is true only for this condition to hold. So if the C is essentially larger than the C star, okay, deriving the condition. And it is possible to show very easily that this C star here is actually larger than the C bar we computed in the innovation phase, in the catch-up phase. So there is essentially, then we go back to the innovation proposition. There is essentially an area here, which is between C bar. C bar is the threshold that essentially determines the dominant strategy of both firms to produce the same variety, and the C star, which is instead a threshold that allows the profit in the post-innovation period to be larger than in the pre-innovation stuff, innovation one, which is essentially a sort of a trap, where they are incentivized to produce the same variety, but the profit now is lower. And it is possible to show that it always exists in C, which falls in this area here. And this is the key result of our paper, essentially. So that there is this paradoxical area, this trap here, where firm can get caught at some point, and actually determines innovation to be detrimental in the place. Okay. Now, as you can imagine, there are some assumptions of our model that needs to be discussed a little bit better. Okay, and you already raised some of them during the past half an hour. So, first of all, our model and the case we refer to assumes innovation to be essentially exogenous, which is not a very, let's say, popular perspective in the theory. Usually, innovation is assumed to be endogenous, so to be something originated by firms. It can be, okay, it's not very, in reality, unrealistic, because there are many cases where innovation, it might be developed in some other sectors. And so once it becomes available in the market, maybe other industry will use that innovation in their own production, but it's originated for some other application. Or it can be similar to the case when a government essentially fully subsidized the innovation, same thing. Now, the question, however, is why would the government or anybody else in reality be willing to finance such an innovation, knowing that there is this negative course, okay? And there are some explanations that we discussed in our paper. So the first, as you said at the very beginning, is as if the government essentially weights the consumer surplus more than it does with the producer surplus instead. So in that case, in assuming that the consumer preference for diversity is low, then in our model it's easy to show that for C greater than C bar, so the C that allows this material to produce the same variety and no diversity, then the consumer surplus in the post-innovation phase, the catch-up phase, is larger than the consumer surplus in the pre-innovation phase. And if you are a government that weights a lot the consumer surplus, so if the alpha is very low in that equation, then okay, the government would prefer the innovation to happen, even though, let's say, it harms the consumer, the producer surplus. Yes.
But could happen if the consumer's preference for diversity is very high. Then they still would buy this black shrimps. And so if people really like the diversity in the product, then they still would buy the one which has a higher production cost. And why would the consumer surplus decrease in this case? So in this case, the firms which do not innovate have still a very strong incentive to produce their own product, own variety at a high cost. And my intuition is that the consumer surplus should still increase because such a consumption bundle become available after the innovation which was not available beforehand.
No, it's not anymore available. So there are no black shrimp anymore.
I mean, but if people really love black shrimps, then they will, my suggestion is that they will buy it for expensive, pay a lot for them, and they will buy some white shrimps much cheaper. So their surplus could be still increased. Because if they buy exactly the same bundle, it becomes cheaper, actually. So my intention that the consumer surplus is always increasing.
It's obviously. No, okay, my understanding, I should talk to you about this, but my,
So you're asking why the second condition?
yeah,
Right, that's important.
It might be more for the producers, so. Because that's, if, because in your scenario, the producer surplus will not go down. either.
yes, it
But
will
the
go
kind
down,
of
exactly. Yes.
gain from lower costs or everyone's happy.
Yeah, so yeah, I see what you mean. Okay, yeah, indeed. Okay, in that sense, so then the second condition maybe is not that relevant. Yeah. Okay, we need to rephrase maybe this.
So a related point, after being sufficiently small, it could still be one, or bigger than one. So I think just the fact that the government cares about consumer surplus, whereas birds don't, could be, I mean, it depends on the magnitude, but it could be enough to generate innovation, even if the profits themselves are really wide.
Yeah. So we,
Because innovation in general increases consumption, so it's a good thing.
yeah, because I think it's lower. Yes. Okay, I'll think about it actually. Yeah, thanks a lot. So, the second, okay, I skip the calculations anyway. So the second, perhaps most reasonable explanation is the one that you mentioned at the very beginning. So it's the role of time preferences, okay? And actually, the good thing of this explanation is that we don't really care about whether innovation is exogenous or endogenous, because it can be proved also in the standard setting with endogenous innovation, that essentially what we want to do is to find the optimal investment to maximize the expected profits. So we have two states of the world, so with innovation or without innovation, and then we assume to have two periods of time. We discard the pre-innovation period. We have so the innovation period and the post-innovation period, the catch-up. And so it is possible to show that as long as the profit from the innovation, from innovating in the innovation period, let's say, is greater than not innovating, okay, there will be always a value of the discount factor sufficiently low for having a positive theta, strictly positive theta, which means that they will innovate, okay? Even though the profit from innovation in the catch-up phase are lower than the profits they will get without innovating, let's say. And if we have, say, our setting where innovation is considered as exogenous, then we would essentially means that we would have an increased amount of investment in innovation, okay, for firms. And still, it is possible to show that as long as the gains in the innovation phase are larger than the discounted loss in the post-innovation phase, then it is convenient. Firms will be willing actually to invest positively in innovation development. The third explanation, okay, it's reminiscent of what I told you in the literature slide. So this coordination problem, this is something that is similar to the Amir result. So if we assume that innovation is, yes, possible only in one variety of a product, but now the firms can innovate at the same time, so simultaneously, so both of them have the capacity to do so, then if they value sufficiently the future, it would be better to and in their common interest, let's say, to coordinate and not to invest in innovation when this key is in the area that I showed you before. But however, because, I mean, there is this coordination problem, okay, then we are back to the prisoner dilemma that has been theorized by Amir, where essentially, if the firm expects the other to innovate, a best response is to innovate as well, because it's better to innovate rather than being the laggard in an innovation setting, okay? Although they know that the profits are essentially lower than in the pre-innovation period.
I was just wondering what happens if you realize this assumption that innovation is possible only in one variety. So let's say that we are in the post-innovation period, and there is practically only one variety produced in the market and some niche market part for the other variety. So whether it's good for firms to think about innovating in the other
niche variety.
variety, so that's different.
Yeah, that would be the optimal setting, right? That you
Yeah.
both innovate in different varieties.
Yeah, so
I don't know if that depends whether this is, no, we didn't show it, but it would be yes, in that case, the both innovate in the different varieties would be the optimal scenario, actually. But even though that's why we have to assume that innovation is possible in one variety only, because otherwise, yes, they both innovate in different varieties and they get higher profits anyway. Yeah, but we didn't really show. I think it's a bit it's clear in a way, right? But we can show, yes. And the last explanation, which is actually the explanation that is the closest to the realistic scenario we examine, is the fact that well, innovation can be the result of lobbying the government, right? Because they want to safeguard their business, their jobs and everything. And so if they lobby the government in the past in order to develop, to get sponsored, let's say, for developing an innovation, there is still the possibility that they don't really care about the future, because they know that as they did lobby the government in the past, they can lobby the government in the future again. Now, in that case, you can lobby the government, let's say, for having another innovation sponsored, but it's not really realistic. What you can do, you can lobby the government in order to protect and correct, let's say, the negative outcomes in the long run. Okay. How? Okay. This happens in trade a lot by imposing essentially protectionist measures. And this is exactly what happened in the US. At some point, okay, an alliance of states, which were the main producers of this stream, successfully petitioned the government to impose very large anti-dumping duties on imports from Asia and also from some other countries, Ecuador and Brazil. Okay, these anti-dumping duties have been, I think, if I'm not wrong, the longest imposed anti-dumping duties. They're still on nowadays, okay? And essentially, this is where somehow all this story came from. We were looking for other reasons to these anti-dumping duties, and we found out that these anti-dumping duties were absolutely not effective in any sense. So we started thinking, what's going on, why did they impose it, and so on and so forth. So, okay, last 15 minutes. So let's look at this case study and let's see if somehow data can confirm that what we, let's say, theorize in the model has some realistic scenario in this case. So I'm going to repeat myself. The only thing important is that innovation did not happen all in once. So they started in early 90s, which was a sort of startup area. They developed innovation as it was the main concept of this biosecurity method, but it was like only applicable to a small set of viruses. The big breakthrough happened in late 90s, where essentially they adopted this technology to a very large set of pathogens that could have affected this US shrimp. Okay, so the innovation breakthrough in reality happened around 1998. And of course, you see what was the gain from innovation. So this is the startup area, they gained something, but then another virus, which was not included in this biosecurity protocol, came up, but they were very fast in adapting the technology existing at almost every virus existing at the time. And so from there, the production of shrimp in the US really boomed, okay? But as I said, on the other side, the Asian countries were still struggling a lot in trying to cope with these outbreaks. At some point, this technology became available. Actually, the problem was that, first of all, there were no patents. They didn't protect the technology, so that the rate at which it spread in the world, in the rest of the countries, was very, very fast, which is not so usual, okay? Usually it takes a longer time than 3-4 years. Plus, the problem was that they tried to make some commercial interest out of it by exporting essentially these larvae, okay, these super larvae of shrimp, which they produce in the labs, okay, trying to export them. So it was literally like a very kind of a silly move from the US, because at that point the Asian countries had access to the same technology very fast. And so they decided to switch their production and to use exactly the same shrimp as the US. And now the Asian countries, those 4 countries, which is India, China, Vietnam, India, China, Vietnam, and is the last one? Yeah, I'm sure. Essentially account for more than 80% of the world production, okay? And so you see what happened. So they caught up to a different time period, but more or less between 2001 and 2001 and 2003. The last, okay, was India, because India essentially was very much afraid of biosecurity concerns. So they stopped importation of this thing from the US. So they kept producing the monodon variety for a longer time, okay? But you see that, and Thailand is probably the most impressive example. They essentially abandoned and substitute their own native production with the US production, okay? Now, in terms of quantity produced, you see that the innovation breakthrough in the US meant that the world production increased a lot. This increase is all of the US, essentially. It's a gain for the US. But then the countries started to catch up, okay? And you see that the curve flattens over time. They reach essentially, they saturated the market, okay? And you see what happened to the US production. So this is the time essentially where the countries catch up, okay? And the innovation, the production from the US plummeted, okay? It never went back to the initial level, okay? Whereas instead, on the other side, the production of the Asian countries started to rise very steeply, okay? This is in terms of the quantity. In terms of price, well, this is very consistent with what we have theorized about this increase and decrease in competition. So when they developed innovation, okay, here, the prices were still more or less same level as before, but when the Asian country entered the market with the same variety, then the prices, because of the higher competition, decreased massively, okay? There is one peak here, okay, which seems that at some point they kind of recovered for a short time. Actually, that is the consequence of the fact that that year, the China production was almost entirely destroyed by a virus, which was a very unknown virus. They couldn't, in any case, solve that problem. So they just quarantined the whole Chinese production. So that means that at that point, they had one big competitor less. So they kind of increased the price. But the year after, China re-entered the market even stronger than before. And so nothing changed. And for the profit, okay, so this is some aggregate profit estimations that we did by looking at the production costs from several surveys, mostly from the Food and Agriculture Organization. So you see that the profit increased again in the innovation phase, but then it started decreasing, and this is quite interesting. The profit in the catch-up phase reached a level that was actually lower than the level it was in the pre-innovation, which is very consistent with what our theoretical prediction indicates. And you see also that the anti-dumping duties that were imposed in 2006 actually didn't affect anything. It didn't affect the price, it didn't affect the profit, and so on and so forth. And again, the profit in that short time from China increased, okay? But only temporarily. So to conclude, okay? So I hope I convince you somehow that we must be very cautious when we develop an innovation. So this is a paper that somehow puts some constraint on when developing an innovation, and one thing that must be considered is exactly this differentiation process mechanism, okay? Because innovation may actually constrain the firms that are active in a market which was previously diversified and differentiated, actually to sell very homogeneous goods. And when there are homogeneous products, the level of competition might increase up to a level that essentially the profit will be lower than they were in the pre-innovation phase. Now, in terms of the validity of this study, so we provided evidence, or like at least descriptive evidence, that comes from a very single and specific industry somehow, which is the shrink. So one question that can arise is, okay, how can you generalize your result? Well, it can be applied, let's say, to any innovation that essentially would make a variety cheaper to produce. And this is something that it's very common in commodities, food commodities like agriculture. We found something very similar for lettuce, actually. At some point, they did something in lettuce with beer, and everybody now is eating essentially the same lettuce, and we didn't know. But it can also happen with some technology innovation, all those technology innovation that somehow incentivized to adopt the same standard. And so, let's say, constrain the market in this sense. And okay, this is the conclusion. So I don't know if there is any question, and I think that comments will be very, very welcome. Thank you. I didn't check if there were like questions online, to be honest. Okay.
You have plenty of answers.
Yes.
I have a question and comment. The question is whether the shipping costs between Asia and the US change over time, because it's possible that if shipping costs decreased a lot, then a lot of frozen foods was imported to the US and not only shrimps, and the profit of US shrimp farmers would decrease anyway.
I don't know. I can't tell you. So I don't know. I haven't checked whether the shipping costs. I can tell you that it happens in a short time. So I don't know how much difference there is in between, I'm saying, 2-3 years. Is I don't know. Also, something that I was thinking was, for instance, in 2001, China accessed the WTO. And that is something that. But we also saw that when without China still, I mean, yeah, it would be like a greater market share for the US, still wouldn't be enough to outweigh what they lost from the other countries.
And the comment is that I think something similar happened in the common agricultural policy of the EU when they introduced a lot of standardization rules. For example, a very silly one, like the cucumbers have to be straight and cannot be curly. And for decades, the European producers who could comply with these laws had a huge profit. But afterwards, the foreign, like South American and Asian producers started to produce straight cucumbers, and they basically collapsed the whole European agricultural market. And now farmers are lobbying against the standardization laws just to increase the variety and differentiate themselves. Their cucumber from the Asian cucumber.
Okay.
And perhaps
Excellent,
I think the demand is very similar,
Yes.
like yours,
indeed.
but perhaps it's more, you know, sexy for people who
Yes, sure, mine is not
like
exactly
cucumber more than cucumber.
thing I would like. But it's a large market, it's a huge market. I know it's like who cares about shrimp. Well, it's the most traded food commodity in the world. Yes.
I didn't know.
So, yeah, people care about shrimp apparently, but we don't know, it's just don't know. Yeah.
It's, I just, maybe it's a bad example, but it might be, so it's a counter example to you, that actually works in your way that, the USDC plug in the computers. Is exactly, I think it works the way that the companies are not inventing, they sort of know, I think, that intuitively that if they've invented any one product, that would be better in any aspect than the current charging prices, that would increase competition and lower their profits.
Yes. Yes, we thought that.
Yeah.
Yes, we thought about the case of it, it would be a mess. But,
Exactly.
yeah,
I was also thinking about the mechanism more generally. I don't think you had in the model a cost to adopt the innovative variety. I think that would even strengthen your, or not necessarily, but because the way I understand your mechanism, I think it's very interesting that if there is this innovative variety like this new shrimp, there's a big gap and there's an extra incentive to adopt, whether stealing, copying, or legitimately adopting. And so this can increase competition in the catch-up phase. And I think this mechanism could be quite general in the industry. I think these agricultural examples are great. I was thinking about even software and technology. If you think about AI, for example, if you create a super successful product like ChatGPT, then everyone is trying to copy it.
yeah, even in a
And
month.
now, yeah,
Initially said
everyone's
no.
trying to do the AI-based chat one. And
Yes.
then maybe at the end, it's going to be a lot more competition.
Yes,
If it's just kind of marginally better than, we're not going to bother copying you, and you can stay competitive for a longer period of time.
yes. Okay. Yes,
So. Well, I have this concern that what is the specificity of this model in the sense that who bears the cost of innovation? And in your approach, if I understand correctly, this is just coming from low-hanging fruit, right?
Mhm.
And the innovation literature is full of other approaches and things, but what is the advantage of tax credit, and to what extent it's good for welfare or welfare, and what is the direct subsidy, so what are the, and still the jury is out. And your question is somewhat outside of this scope, because nobody assumes that this innovation is coming free, coming really to the enterprise. And the agent is, well, you may plug in this oral welfare, which is some of the consumer and the producer, but this is not the typical case. I mean, in this innovation dilemma, whether to launch and what to do with those players in the market who are catching up. So I'm a bit.
no, yeah, I see your concern, and indeed, yeah, it's something that, I mean, it's common that has been raised many times. We have to think about indeed, to make it more like, closer to the general case where innovation is costly, is endogenously produced, and there are some adoption costs. Yes, I agree, because it is a possible scenario, but it's not the standard.
The puzzle is here that why did the US government just give away really the technology and hurting the local producers.
Yeah.
This is a mystery to me, and you have to give some hint and something that why it happened. So they came up with other issues that then afterwards they had this lobby group which managed to achieve this unwanted
Yeah.
measures. So then something crazy happened in the realm of the US government agency. But it will be divided away,
Okay.
or always the Chinese.
Yeah.
Very much.
Okay. No, thank you very much. Okay.
One more. Someone. Not done, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.